The information featured in this program is general in nature and therefore should not be relied upon. Guests appearing on the program may have commercial arrangements with some of the companies mentioned. Before making any investment, insurance or financial planning decisions, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether or not your decision is appropriate for you. Property Investing Matters is brought to you by Destiny, empowering investors to achieve success through property investment for more than 24 years.
Hello and welcome to Property Investing Matters for another night of great property investing education. Sit back and relax because for the next 45 minutes or so, we plan to continue our discussion from a few weeks ago around building your own development. We had such a great response to that show that I've invited Peter Kalizos back to answer the mountain of questions that I received and to get a little deeper into some of the techniques of building your own development. Now, at any time during the show, you can email your question to me via pim@mypropertytv.com.au, or you can also pop them into a comment on my Facebook page or send me a DM. And when we answer it on the show, you will win one of my books. And this week it's our book, The Diary of a Small Developer, which thankfully we now have in our hot little hands. Now to my guest, the property professor Peter Kalizos. He holds a teaching degree, a Masters of Business in Property, and a Master of Urban and Regional Planning. He's currently the Program Director of the Master of Property at the University of Adelaide. He's been teaching in real estate and investment for more than 20 years, and I feel like I've been saying that for a while, so it's probably now 25 years. He's also a contributor to numerous newspapers, magazines, websites, and he's sought after by TV and radio for his research and comments on the property market. On the show tonight, we are going to be having a look at doing your own development and talking about what Peter's experiences are, and also mine, of course, too. Let's welcome Peter to the show tonight. Hi, Peter.
Hello, Margaret. How are you?
Good. Happy to have that book finally in hard copy.
There it is.
There it is. Just to prove that we have it, Peter has a physical copy in his hands and it's looking great. I'm very happy with how it's all turned out. How about you?
Yeah, I'm very happy with it. Certainly, it was a lot of work, but very satisfying. And to actually be able to hold it in your hot little hand is wonderful. I know it was on Amazon beforehand, but you know that's a virtual book. But to actually have a physical book in your hand is one of those very satisfying moments in life.
Absolutely, particularly when it's one that took so long to write. You know, we did, as we've mentioned many times on the show, we had an expectation that we'd be maybe 12 to 18 months in the entire process from the moment we made that decision to start. And I was flicking through the book when it came the other day, and I did notice that the problems for us began at day 12. So, you know, we started out, and I diarised it, so the days have numbers. I think we got to day 1176 in the end before it finished. But at day 12, the first problems began to arise, and from then on, it was 3/4 of the book full of issues and problems and barriers that we encountered.
Yeah, and that's a reflection of reality. Like, you know, I felt sorry for you that we came across these issues, but it's great for the readers because that's what happens. You know, you and I have done a number of developments and, you know, none of them have gone smoothly, and they may not be through your own fault. It might be the builder's issue. We had COVID this time around, whatever it might be. It could be the banks, could be the council. There are many different things that can go wrong. But for me, I'm very happy that it's a true reflection of how a small-scale development will probably go. And the other great thing is we diarised 2 of your developments. One, we had issues right at the beginning, and the other one, we had different issues during near the end. So, you know, it covers a wide range of issues that people might encounter when they're doing their own little development.
Yeah, look, and I'm with you, although I would have like to have had a smoother ride because it was quite stressful in places. And if you're like me, which most people are, and you have an entire life which is pretty busy anyway and a lot of calls and demands on your time, to then have a development that just required so much thought and input and supervision wasn't good for me, but it was fabulous for the book, because had we written a book where everything went well, we wouldn't have been giving people any kind of education or preparation for real life.
No, I agree. There are a number of books out there on property development, but there is nothing like ours, which is a real case study with real problems that people can learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Peter, let's get into some questions. And last time we talked about the development, we talked about some of the more basic things of developing a property, and we got a lot of really good questions from viewers, which we'll get to after the break. But for now, I have a couple of deeper questions to ask you as well. Of course, I know the answers to them because I've been there, but let's start by explaining the whole thing around council. It was a learning experience for me. There's a lot of council rules around developing, but then there's also state planning rules, and it took me a while to understand how they related to each other and, you know, why at times they seem to be different. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, interesting, Margaret. When we first started, we were in South Australia, the South Australian development. We were working under the development plan, and there were state-based rules and council rules. But by the time you finished, we had changed our planning system, and now all councils operate under not the same, but similar rules. And councils have their own little idiosyncrasies because they may have more character in the area that they want to preserve, or for whatever reason. But it's not just in many states, state rules are different to council rules, but then councils, individual councils, also have their own rules. So that's why, you know, I highly recommend having some professionals assist you, as you did, especially those with local knowledge, which is particularly important if you are remote, as you were, to help you out. Because it's not, I mean, investing in property is not that simple, but I can guarantee you developing property is a lot more complex than just long-term investing.
Look, so I guess one of the big issues that we had from the outset is that what we ultimately wanted to do pretty much did fit into those state planning rules, but the council rejected it because it didn't fit into their rules. So are you saying, had we started that development now, we may not have come across that initial rejection because the state planning rules were essentially satisfied?
That is correct. And that's one of the reasons that we changed, because I think we've got over 70 councils in South Australia. So there are 70 different plans you had to know. But now we have just the one. It's called the Planning and Design Code. And it's all online. You type in an address and it'll tell you not what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do, but what they want to see in that particular area. Like, is it dwellings? Is it offices? Is it churches? Is it libraries? What are the minimum site areas, if there are any? What are the minimum frontages? What are the overlays? Is there a flood overlay? Heritage overlay? Are you too close to the airport, which means you've got height restrictions? So now it's not easy, but it is certainly easier than when we first started your South Australian development.
Well, book wouldn't have been as good if it had been easier, but it still does highlight some important things. Obviously, there's what feels like 1,000 rules in those planning rules. Do you need to satisfy every one of them to get a development through? Because if so, that does provide a fair amount of constraints around what you can build.
No. One thing that I learnt early on in my developing career was they are not actually rules, they are guidelines. So they're not in black and white, there's plenty of grey. So when you're reading these plans, there's not many words like must and should. There are other words that encourage you to meet the guidelines, but if you don't, that could be okay. But there's no magic number here. Like if the minimum site area is 300 square metres and you are 5% below that, you still get in. It's not like that. It's all about negotiation. So it's all give and take. So if you're a little bit less on the site area, what else are you going to give? Do you have more frontage? Are you going to provide more private open space? Are you going to provide more landscaping that's required? It's all about give and take and negotiation. So that's why, and I know this is one of the questions later, that's one of the reasons a private town planner and professional are so important, because they know how to play the game.
Yeah, and for us, essentially, it did come down to that, didn't it? We knew that we had one of the planning conditions or rules that we couldn't quite satisfy, but we over-satisfied a whole lot of other things to make up for it. And I think in the end, that's what got us through that Land and Environment Court, which is my next question. What is a Land Environment Court, and what is it there for?
Right. So when there is a dispute, like if you think you're right, the council thinks they're right, but you can't come to an agreement, you can go to a court. It's a bit like other courts. I mean, it's not as high as the Supreme Court and the High Court, but you can go to the ERD court, as we call it in South Australia. But one of the great things about it is, rather than just going from arguing straight into the courtroom, there is a mediation process, which is what we did. I know, Margaret, you weren't there at the time. I think it was your birthday, actually, the day that we met with the professionals. And we were able to sit down with the sitting member and the council and us. There were no planners, there were no lawyers involved. And then we came to a reasonable agreement, which is what you said. All right, we're a little bit short here, but we're giving more there. So how about if you let the development go through? And that's what happened.
Yeah, and I think the point about that is that when the proposal was first made to me that perhaps we want to go to the Land and Environment Court, a few people had mentioned, well, you're going to need a lawyer and that'll be minimum of 20,000, and then there's this cost and this cost and this cost. And I worried about it at first until it was pointed out to me that we may never get to court, and a significant amount of these complaints that get lodged to the court or cases that get lodged in court, a significant amount of them are dealt with in arbitration beforehand. And the court makes you have that arbitration anyway, that discussion. So a significant amount of them can be worked out there. In our case, the cost was $150.
Which was well worth it, wasn't it? Because what the council is hoping will happen is, if you don't know much about development and the council says no, you think, well, that's the end of the story. Well, it's not. If you know how the system works, you can go to mediation, push the boundaries, and maybe get your development through, providing it has merit, of course, which is exactly what we did. So again, I don't want to harp on it too much, but I know many of the questions are about how do I get onto my first development. Well, one of the keys, as you did, Margaret, is have a good team behind you that can help you all through from the start to the finish.
All right, let's talk about that team now. And I know that we started with a surveyor. What is the role of a surveyor? Because to me, I thought a surveyor came and put pegs on the block, but it turned out that our surveyor, Scott, was far, far more useful to us than that.
Yeah, Scott is certainly a gem. You're right, Margaret. A surveyor generally does put pegs in the ground, so everyone knows exactly where the boundaries are. Because when you're developing, knowing where the boundaries are is really important. Number one, you need to be set back from boundaries. And number two, you can't assume that the current fence, is on the boundary. So typically, a surveyor will peg out the ground, and on a larger development, let's say if somebody goes to them with a 1 hectare of land and they want to subdivide it, a surveyor will be able to help them work out what is the most effective and efficient way to subdivide this allotment of land. But Scott, the bonus with Scott was he'd worked in this council for many, many years, knew many of the planners, knew where to push their buttons, what they were looking for. So, this council was really keen on landscaping, for example. So he knew, all right, if we're a bit short on site area, let's go for landscaping. So Scott, not only did he have surveying knowledge, but also town planning knowledge. So he was a great asset.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that I was about to make. We used Scott as a surveyor, which meant that I didn't really need a town planner because he had all that knowledge. But I used a town planner in my New South Wales development. What does a town planner typically do to help all of this get through?
Right. So Town planners generally have to go to university for 3 or 4 years, and one of the components of town planning is development assessment. So the planners in the council obviously are very familiar with development assessment, but us who've never developed before have no idea. So generally what happens, all town planners will go to a council straight after uni to work, and then many of them start their own private practice. So the beauty about using your own private town planner, they speak the same language. So they know what's critically important. Like at the moment, sustainability is really important. So that means, green open spaces, opportunity for solar panels on roofs. Those sorts of little things that we may not think of can actually help you get your development over the line. And getting your development over the line is no small thing. Like we're talking hundreds of thousands, if not over $1 million here, even for a small scale development. So being able to get that development over the line and to make it happen is really important.
What about building brokers? Now, we won't spend too much time on building brokers because, as far as I can see, at this point, South Australia are the only people who have them.
So a building broker is a bit like a mortgage broker, but for building. So you go to a mortgage broker if you want them to go and find you a number of different lenders and who's going to find you the best deal. A building broker does similar. They will take your paperwork, your documentation, your design, your all the specifications, send it out to a number of builders, and then they will send back their quotes, and then the building broker will recommend which builders you should go with. Because what you'll find is when they quote, they don't all quote apples for apples. Some will exclude landscaping, some will include fencing, some will exclude tiling. So a building broker will be able to read through those contracts and recommend to you which is the best person for your project.
Yeah, but the important thing is you don't pay a building broker.
No, just like a mortgage broker. They get paid from the lender. The building broker gets paid by the builder. Doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah, it's a great way to work, but unfortunately South Australia at this stage is the only place that has that. So that's something that you need to take on yourself if you're doing a development. And fortunately in the book, I had a building broker in South Australia, but in New South Wales I didn't. And I had to undertake that role myself of being able to get all of the different building quotes and compare them between each other to make sure that we were talking about the same thing, which was a fairly big job. The building broker was great to have. Now, very quickly, what are some of the things that a developer typically overspends on that doesn't really add anything to their development?
So once the building is underway, sometimes people imagine their development as their home and they want to put in high quality fixtures and fittings. You need to be, just like you do with investing, you need to be developing with your head and not your heart. You need to include fixtures and fittings that are right for your market. There's no point in putting really expensive stone bench tops in an area where the property prices are quite low because people aren't prepared to pay that extra for them. There's no point in putting in a swimming pool in your new development if that's not what the market wants. If you want a swimming pool in your home, that's fantastic. You go do that. So really, from the start to the finish with development, you need to be thinking with your head and not your heart, because this is a money-making enterprise. So keep that in mind.
What are some of the big expenses that do crop up that a lot of developers seem to miss out on or don't count on?
Yeah, so generally the most expensive parts of the house are the kitchen and the bathroom. So putting in very expensive fixtures and fittings in the kitchen, like stone bench tops, top-end appliances such as Smeg, for example, or Miele, and then getting imported tiles from Italy and tiling their bathroom from floor to ceiling. This is where you've only got a limited amount of money because the bank's only going to lend you so much. If you spend too much where it's not needed, then you won't be able to finish off your project.
So Peter, I'm actually talking about what things crop up that people don't think are going to crop up. That, what's typically missed by small developers that suddenly hits them in the face and they go, oh, well, that's 10,000 I didn't expect.
Okay. One is site works. You can look at a block and it looks level, but even like a 1 or 2 meter difference from the front to the back means retaining walls. So this is where a surveyor comes in really handy. They'll be able to tell you where the lie of the land is and whether you're going to need retaining walls. And the other killer is time, because time is money in property development. The longer your project takes to build, the more interest you are going to have to pay, and that builds up and builds up. And unfortunately, many people have found that during COVID, and through no fault of their own, but due to a shortage of materials, a shortage of labour, their projects are taking longer. The build cost may not have increased so far as the building contract, but in the end, it does cost them more because it's taking longer.
Yeah, I must admit we were a little bit lucky in that regard, in that it took us 3 years to get to site on any of them. Having said that, it was lucky that I did have some money available in a line of credit, because I did build up around about $20,000 to $30,000 on each development that went into it before we even had a decision on whether they could be developed. And that was money that was all at risk. I clarified that in the book, how much money I was spending and what kind of risk was around that money. It was money that was all at risk, and it was also money that I was paying interest on as I waited for this to happen. So, I had about $50,000 to $60,000 in the game for a 2-year period almost, when I was paying interest on that, and that was adding to the bottom line.
Yeah, you should, with development, investment's a bit more forgiving, but with development, you shouldn't keep things too thin or too trim. You need plenty of extra cash just in case you need it. So I've mentioned one was site works, the other one was time. One that's happened to me a few times is boundaries. I assumed that the fence was on the boundary. It was not. In one case, I had to pay to get a neighbour's carport cut back and rebuilt. Another case, I had to replace the fences where I didn't think I needed to. I mean, these are all just maybe thousands of dollars, but they can build up to total tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. And if you don't have that, that's a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, both of my developments came out far better than we expected them to. They both ended up being valued at a much higher amount than we thought they would be. And, in hindsight, I sometimes stop and think, well, should I have even done a different development, say on South Australia, because of how well that's gone? Both of them have rented far more than we thought they would rent for. Was I just lucky?
Oh, lucky. That define lucky, Margaret. Luck is where preparation meets opportunity. But yours was quite unique in that what I find with many, what I call mum and dad developers, they'll go out with the idea of buying a block, knocking down the house, building 2 and selling 2. But invariably, they will only sell one, because if they sell both, they will actually lose money. So they're hoping to sell one, reduce the mortgage, keep one for a few years. When its price comes up, then sells it. So, Margaret, you did very well. It wasn't just luck, but you were very well prepared. I mean, you're a very experienced investor. You know a lot about property, but you also had a team of professionals that could guide you.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think there was an element of luck in mine as well, because the delays then meant that we finished right before what was a major property boom everywhere. So I got those values that I didn't expect. I want to point out, I didn't need to get big values on them though. What I needed mine to be able to do is to generate enough rental income to cover their costs while I waited for that growth. I was lucky that the growth came at the beginning of mine, which doesn't always happen, but it certainly worked out very, very well for me. Well, if you have a question about any aspect of property investing, send an email to pim@mypropertytv.com.au or pop the question into a comment on our Facebook page. And for your efforts, each caller or sender of a viewer question that we answered tonight will receive a copy of Diary of a Small Developer. Now, it is a step-by-step guide of how to carry out your own development using my own up-close and personal experience doing 2 of my own. We're off for a short break. When Property Investing Matters returns, we will be getting to those questions that you've been sending. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Property Investing Matters, free and on demand on My Property TV. I'm Margaret Lomas, and joining me is the property professor, Peter Kalizos, and we're discussing building your own small development. Remember that you will receive a copy of our book, Diary of a Small Developer, if we answer your question on the show tonight. So send me an email to pim@mypropertytv.com.au or pop along to Facebook and you can leave me a comment there. Peter, thanks for sticking around. We've got a whole bunch of questions tonight from our viewers, and I'm going to go to the first one tonight. It's from Andy, and Andy asks, "Hi Margaret and Peter. When starting out with little knowledge and no experience in the property development arena, what would be my first step to achieving these kinds of results?" And he is referring, I'm sure, to the results that we experienced in my developments.
There you go. Get yourself a copy of that book, which he is. But I think you need to start off small. So read books. There must be a number of online forums where there are people with similar interests to you. Look at adult community education. So these are courses which are run in different states, and they range from developing property through to flower arranging. They might only cost $100 or $200. Stay away from those boot camp courses where they cost $10,000 for a weekend and they really just try and upsell you something. But educate yourself, mix with other like-minded people, and then start developing a team of professionals. Which professionals? If you read the book, you find out which ones. We've already mentioned some. Surveyor, town planner. There are many other people involved. But you need to take baby steps, and your first one is educating yourself.
Look, Andy, I'm really glad that we wrote this book, because before we wrote it, I looked around at other developing books that were available, and they were pretty much a textbook, and they had a specific set of instructions on how to do your development. And now that I've done the two, I know that those specific set of instructions were probably very far from the truth of how everything worked. And the other thing that most books don't achieve is it doesn't achieve that opportunity for you to manipulate and manage the situation as they're occurring. You could read one of those other small development books and find that your development goes nothing like it says it should, and then you're a little bit lost. What I really like about what we had the opportunity to do with the book is because we wrote it diary style, where literally it is live action as you read it. So every time I received an email that either let me down or raised me up again, I wrote about that email and the circumstances around what had happened and where we were headed. And it's a blow-by-blow description, which to me will prepare you for the development. And I think that's important. I think education is definitely the key. And I know Peter and I have had a few discussions, A, about retiring, and B, if we don't retire, maybe turning the book into an online course that other people can then get. So look out for that. If it happens, though, it's a long way off here, and we might retire instead.
Maybe.
Next question. Next question comes from George, or if George, you're from anywhere else in the world, it could be Jorge even. I have a friend called Jorge, so hopefully I said it the right way. George says, "Joanne and I have always been equities and bonds investors, but in the last 12 months, we ventured further along the investment spectrum by purchasing 2 residential investment properties through Destiny. Would you see a small development, as you will cover with Peter tonight, as a natural progression for our nascent property portfolio? Thanks and best regards." Peter, I must say that I felt ready for a development, and I don't think it shouldn't have been my first step in property investing. And I think you referred earlier to the fact that I'm an experienced property investor, and I do believe that having that experience in property investing almost gave me a lot of natural instinct in different things that we were doing, including when it came to having to decide on what was going into the properties. And when you read the book, you'll see that one property, the one in Adelaide, I was very, very in touch with my market, and I fitted that out accordingly and added a few little luxuries that didn't cost me much. the property in New South Wales, I knew I was building for the top end, and I'm incredibly glad that I went for the top end because it's worked out really, really well. But a lot of my experience around property investing definitely played into my ability to do all of that, Peter.
Yeah, look, I agree. And look, property development is not for everyone. I was actually thinking about this morning, Margaret, how I was going to answer the question. And I've come up with a comparison. Like investing and developing is like being fit. You can be fit in different ways. You can run, you can ride, you can go to yoga, you can do aerobics, you can go to the gym. In investing, you can buy houses, you can buy them in different areas, you can buy different types of properties. Developing is like a marathon. Why would you want to run a marathon? Unless it's going to achieve a certain goal, why would you do it? You can achieve your fitness goals in many other ways. It doesn't have to be through a marathon. So, number one, you need to be able to take on risk because there is much more risk with development. And if you are quite risk averse, developing may not be for you. Look, if after you read the book and after you watch the show, you reckon developing is not for you, that's okay. That is fine. But you need to prepare yourself. You need to do like Margaret has done. You start off your life in property as a long-term investor. Then when you're experienced, you might consider developing. But developing is not for everyone.
Yeah, George, because a development can go really well, it can go okay, and it can go really badly, I wouldn't like to see a brand new property investor jumping into development. You're also an equities investor who is used to the capacity to be able to offload an investment that's not so great very quickly. Development takes the whole investment property argument and just expands it out over potentially years as well. And that could be a frustrating circumstance for you to be labouring under. I think there's nothing wrong with starting out your property portfolio and buying properties that may possibly lend themselves in the future to future development. I own a couple of properties still where when I bought them I thought maybe down the track, if the town plan changes a little and the council starts to go after more infill development, this is a property that I might be able to put something else on. I've got another 2 in South Australia like that, and I'm tossing around whether I want to do anything with them or not. Both of them, I've held them for 10 years. But I didn't buy them because I wanted to develop them. I bought them because as they were a good investment that potentially in the future might be developed if I wanted to squeeze more out of those properties. And I may yet do that, but I may not after my experience with these last 2. So I just think if you're new to property investing, it's probably premature for you to be thinking about developing, unless you've got a lot of time on your hands, unless you really will enjoy the process of developing and enjoy the stress of it as well, because there's a lot of that involved. The next question comes from Pete, and Pete says, "Hi Margaret, I have a question for the show. I bought a development site late last year. It currently has a dwelling sitting over 2 lots on a street corner. The development requires realignment of the existing boundary and installation of service connections for the new lot, but should be a pretty straightforward project. We have rented the existing dwelling as is and just sitting on it for now. The current numbers are favourable and there's no rush to do anything. My question is this: how do you assess when a good time is to do the development? Should I keep acquiring for now and land bank for later, or just do the development?" Peter, it's not clear to me from this whether he said he's got a house over 2 lots, but I don't know if the dwelling sits over the 2 lots and whether he's saying he can keep the existing dwelling and just realign the boundary or not. So I guess it comes down to it's either a demolition and a build of 2, or however many they allow, or a realignment and then just a backyard sort of side block development.
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer, because for me it all goes back to your goals. Like, why did you buy that development site in the first place? Are you looking to make quick money and move on to the next development? So do you want to be a full-time developer? If you do, then you'll have to develop this and then move on, find another site and develop that. Is it just to create long-term wealth? Well, if it's to create long-term wealth, then there is no rush. Right now is not a great time to build. There is a shortage of building materials. There is a shortage of labour. So I certainly would not be building right now. building prices are also very high. What I might be doing is looking to get the approval. And if you read our book, you'll see that approvals were not straightforward for us, especially for the South Australian project. So you might think, oh, I've got years to go. Well, it may not take you years to get approval, but it can certainly take you several months. So I would strongly recommend that you seriously consider getting the approvals for what you want to do, because as Margaret found out with our South Australian project, the rules changed, and what she thought she could build when she first bought it was not what she could build when the time came to build. So check with the council. Do they propose any changes to their plans? And if you hear that they do and it's going to be less developer friendly, then you need to get your plans organised sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we definitely ran into hitches because when we bought the site, we thought we could do 4, and we could have, but we delayed getting those approvals for a year and a half, at which stage it was reduced to 3, and in hindsight, 3 may have been okay to do and may have been profitable in the end. At the time when we did the feasibility, it wasn't profitable, so we were going to lose money. The other thing about it as well is Peter asked me at the beginning, are you building to sell and make money immediately? People do that. They build, sell, pay the tax, roll it into another one, build, sell, pay the tax, and get a bigger and bigger equity stake as long as they're successful in each development. Or are you holding it for the long term? If you're holding them for the long term, it's a different argument, because so long as they covered themselves cost-wise, which all of mine did, I didn't really need the values to stack up that much. The values didn't matter so much to me. There's 1,000 different questions that need to be answered for you before you know whether now's the time, Pete. So fortunately, you're getting a copy of the book for asking the question, and the book will help you to understand more about what you'll go through so you can make that decision for yourself as to whether or not now is the time. Next question is from Benjamin, and Benjamin says, hey Margaret, I can't wait to read your book. My question is, if you were a first-time developer, where would you start? I think we know the answer to this question, Peter.
I think we do. There we go. Hold on. He's getting a copy anyway, isn't he? Yeah, like we said before, it's all education. Like you go to school, you go to TAFE, you go to uni to learn to do something before you actually do it. Property is no different. In particular, property development. Educate yourself, inform yourself, books, mixing with like-minded people, doing some courses, and that way you build up your knowledge base.
Yeah, and I think too, the other thing, Ben, to know about this is that it isn't, as I've said earlier, it's not just a book that says step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. If it was, then it would be a book that you would only need to read when you're ready to go with the development. It's a book that when you get to the end of it, you'll be educated to the point where you'll be able to decide whether developing is for you or how you would go about it. So it is a story as well as being educational, and that story will help to prepare you for that investment. So I think if you read the book first, then at the end of it you'll then be able to ask yourself the question, is developing for me, and am I ready to go with this? And so people who aren't even thinking about developing at the moment will find it a good read anyway. They'll find it an interesting read, like a story, because it was a story and was, as we said, it was full of drama. The book will help you decide if now is the time for you, or if ever is the time for you as well. You might read it and go, well, I could never go through that. I suspect a lot of people will do that as well. Next question is from Nick, and Nick says, hi Margaret, I have a question for you regarding tradespeople. How do you find and encourage quality tradespeople to take on your jobs and finish them in 2022 when tradespeople are in such high demand? I've offered to pay for the job up front as an incentive to push my job to the front of my plumber's priorities, but I've had no luck so far, and almost a year on my roof replacement hasn't started. Thanks, love your books and show. It's tough at the moment, isn't it, Peter?
It is. It's very tough. Where you're struggling to find tradespeople, the tradespeople are struggling to find materials. Unfortunately, I do not have a magic bullet for you. you might have to pay more than you expected to. I know you wanted to pay them up front, which is a great initiative, but you still can't get anyone. I don't know if you live in a regional area, maybe you'll have to get people to come in from further away, which means it's going to cost you more. But unfortunately, there is no simple answer to the trade shortage that we are experiencing now. And plus, there are many able-bodied tradespeople that can't work right now because they're in isolation, for example. Either they got COVID or somebody they know has got COVID. So but it's no different to many other industries. Look, we're supposed to catch a plane on Friday to go interstate. We've already got a message to say you need to get there 2 hours. This is domestic flight. 2 hours before you leave, because they have so many staff that are away isolating, either got COVID or live with somebody with COVID.
Yeah, airports are crazy right now. Look, Nick, 3 small tips. They may not be any use to you because, as Peter says, it's a difficult one that you can't really have an impact on. The first one is, as Pete says, you might need to pay a little bit more to get someone there. And the way you ascertain whether you should do that is this a job that, if it's done, will then start earning more money, and if it's not done, will start losing me money, in which case assess how long that year's wait will cost, and work out whether it's worth offering that to the tradesman to do it. Second thing is to obviously plan way ahead. So way before you need something, you book it in, even if you're not sure. And this would apply to you developing. You'd be booking in people way ahead of time. The third thing, which I had some luck with last week, which sounds a bit odd, and I don't know why this worked, but I'm a member of a couple of Facebook groups in my local area. There's 2 that are suburban ones in my immediate area, and I needed somebody because we had some waterproofing issues with one of the properties that I have near where I live, and I'd called around a number of people and they all said the same thing: I can't make it there, it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks. I put it out there and said, can anybody help me, or does anyone know of it? And within 24 hours I actually had 3 people, and 2 of them were people who were winding back and retiring a bit, but they were still tradespeople who weren't currently advertising to do any work, and they contacted me and said, yeah, look, I can come and have a look at that for you. And I actually had someone there the next day, and I could have had 3 different people who were willing to come and do that. So that's just a little tip that you never know, it might work. Next question from Reese. We have a lot of questions tonight, as I said. Reese says, hi there. How did your ability to initiate small-scale residential property developments influence your overall property selection methodology for your portfolio? With regard to debt serviceability, did residential property developments help you achieve new levels that you wouldn't have been available in a buy and hold strategy? And at what point in the average investor's property portfolio investment strategy do you think they should start to look at property development, assuming they're not restricted in time? Looking forward to the show and would love to receive that new book. So, Peter, I'll sort of start with this one. Ability to initiate small-scale residential development probably influenced my overall selection. Initially, not at all, because I'd say I bought my first 20 properties not even thinking about whether they could be developed in the future. It turned out some of them could, but I didn't think of it that way. When I then bought those first, Peter, properties in Elizabeth in South Australia, I definitely bought those 4 with a view to thinking down the track at some point I could make them into 8. And I did that. It was almost 10 years later again that I did it, but I did that. Remember, as I pointed out before, I knew that they were okay on their own without ever needing to develop if I couldn't develop. So that it didn't cost me anything extra to put aside those ones. So really, as a property investor, I never really saw myself as a developer until I got fairly far down the track, and even then it was another 10 years before I instigated any development at all. Pete, number 2, debt serviceability. It can and can't help, can't it?
Yeah, that's right. Look, again, that financing a development is very different to financing an investment. Number 1, your deposit requirement is higher. Number 2, your interest is higher. So therefore that affects your serviceability. What I have found is you need to find a bank or a mortgage broker that understands property development finance and utilize their services. Because one thing that I've done in the past is capitalize the interest. So rather than making mortgage repayments or interest repayments throughout the process, you wait until the end, which helps a lot with your cash flow. Doesn't suit everyone. In the end, you end up paying more because I'm paying all the interest at the end rather than paying it along the way. But find yourself a lender or mortgage broker that truly understands property development finance.
And Reece, in regard to that debt serviceability question, I'm assuming what you mean from that is does doing developments build in extra value more quickly than just organic growth on property, and therefore enable you to service bigger and bigger debts more quickly? And the answer to that is yes and no. The 8 that I did in South Australia, and even though this book talks about these being my first developments, they were my first developments that I did alone. When I did the 8 in South Australia, I did nothing. I handed everything over to basically a project home builder, and they did everything for me. And there are things I would do differently on those now that I know more about developing. But when I did those 8, there was no difference in my equity between 4 and 8. By the time I added the loan only just covered the extra equity that I got. There was no difference. So it did not help me leverage into more property when I completed them. They probably would now, because I've now got 8 growing where before I only had 4 growing. And so now that I'm 6 years down the track from undertaking that development, I've got more skin in that game as a result of that. But it took, for the first 6 years, it didn't help me in any way, shape or form. I had no more leveraging ability. These last 2 I do though, but that is not solely down to the fact that we did a good development. It's really more down to the fact that the property market was well timed and grew just as we finished these 2 developments, and after a year they were both worth significantly more than they were on the day we finished. The New South Wales one was valued at 1.1 million when we finished it, and it was just recent valued a year later at 2. So it really took advantage of that. If there wasn't a property boom, it'd probably still be worth 1.1 million. So I don't think there's always a big impact on your equity when you develop because of all those costs that you don't anticipate. I think you have to do a really big scale development of probably 10 to start building in any decent profit levels first up and decent equity levels. Third question we've already answered. When are you ready? The book will help you to know that. Okay, we've still got more questions. Pete, are you still with me?
Still here.
Okay, good. This one's from Christian. Can you give us a high-level rundown of financing a small property development? What are the basic steps? Okay, let's not spend too much time on this, Pete, but basically, what are the steps for getting finance? Once you've got your good broker and your bank and you know where you're going, what steps do you take?
All right. Well, first thing I would encourage you to do is minimize the amount of debt on the land that you own. So try and put as much cash of your own into that because that helps the numbers look better. But I go back to the previous question, and that is find somebody that understands property development finance really well, because the deposit requirements are different, the interest is different, the way you make your repayments can be different, and that can help significantly. So we don't know everything about finance, but it's a bit like I was saying, development, you need a good team around you. Find yourself a good lending team or mortgage broker.
Yes, which would be Destiny, because we're a really good mortgage broker. And of course, I know how it all works.
And you're good at development, so perfect.
To give you a very quick rundown, you obviously need cash up front in some form. If you have your own cash up front and you still have your own home loan, then you're better off having that cash paid into your home loan, create equity and set up a loan, preferably a line of credit, which I know lines of credit come at higher interest rates, but you're going to renegotiate that at the end anyway, because you need that cash up front. I found I needed between $30,000 and $40,000 to take care of the things that had to be done before I could even get the approval. It's surveyor's costs. There were costs that came up that I was able to push off. So things like services connections and some other costs that I was able to push off and take from the loan that I ultimately got. But there were a fair amount of things up front. You know, your surveyor's going to be 5,000 or 6,000, your town planner, the same again. There's money up front that you've got to have money for. And if you're using cash, you can't have a deduction on it, on the interest on it. If you've got no other personal debt, use the cash. If you haven't, set up a line of credit, and the interest on that from the moment you get that line of credit will be deductible. So that's the first thing that you need to do. Once you get to the point where you've got the approval with the council, you then go to the bank for the development finance, and it's just like anything. It's like a project home. They'll approve the finance, they'll do it in however many stages. I think we had 6 stages in South Australia, we had 10. In New South Wales, it was a much bigger development, so there was 10 stages there. It was originally 11, but the bank wanted 10, so I had to negotiate that back with the developer. And then you make your first payment up front before they go to site, and then the other payments come at specific points. It's usually when the slab's laid, it's the first payment. The next payment is when they get to plate high or to the roof. The next one's when the roof's on. So there's a specific set of payments that happen then. But you do need access to that money when you start, because you won't get very far unless you can get all that stuff done before you even can apply to the bank for money. At the end of it, you can then renegotiate the loan to include that line of credit that you got up front. Maybe you borrow a little bit more, so the last payment becomes enough to pay back that line of credit, so it's all under the one loan. Hopefully that's not too confusing for you, but you can always give us a call and we can help with that. Next question is a quick one, Pete, from Vasily. He's a long-time viewer. How do you get started in development when it seems so risky? Should you build up more investment experience first? I mean,
Yes,
it is risky, isn't it? We've got to be honest.
It is. It's very risky, but potentially there is higher returns. But with many investments, the higher the return, the higher the risk. So as we've answered in some previous questions, developing is not for everyone, but if you think it is for you, you need to start with investment, long-term investment, get some experience about how property works. And then if it suits your goals to develop because you want to make some quick equity or you want to quickly, literally build your portfolio, then okay. But you need some experience in property first.
Now, Pete, the next question is along the same theme as a number of them, but it's really the last part of the question that I want us to address, and it's from Liam. And Liam says, hi, Margaret and Peter. At what point in your investing career would you recommend looking at property development? We've answered that. But he then says, is it wise to structure your purchases early on that have development potential, for example, buying them in trusts or companies?
100%. You need to work out what you're going to do with the property before you actually settle on the property. So if you're going to build and sell them, the entity that owns them may be different if you're going to build and keep them. Find yourself a good accountant, get some good advice as to how to structure this particular deal, because what you don't want to do is find that you've bought this property in your name, and then when you want to develop it 2 years later, the accountant says, you know what, it would have been better in joint names or something else, and then you have to transfer the property, which could probably incur stamp duty. So you need to have a plan so that you can work out which entity the property needs to go in from day one.
Yes, you definitely need to know more about your own tax circumstances as well. So, and what you plan to do with the development. So if you are planning to have something that you develop down the track by building and then selling them off, then it could be that you want that property, if you're a couple, in the lower income earner's name, because you will have capital gains tax when you sell, and that's essentially at whoever owns its income tax rate is. So if you're in a high bracket, and it'll throw you into a high bracket, probably with the profit you make, then you want to maybe in a non-income earner's name, if that can be done, or maybe you want it in a trust so that you can distribute it differently. But the most important thing that Peter's pointing out here is you need that tax advice from your accountant before you start, not after you've already bought the property. Next one comes from PL. PL says, how easy is it to do small developments from afar? For example, if you're in a different state, especially if you can't see a lot with video calls compared to when you're on the ground and unable to do regular inspections as the development progresses. Pete, what I really want to point out with this question here is that I don't think you should be going into small property development thinking that you're going to be doing inspections and be the one on the ground and that hands-on. That's a different proposal altogether.
You're dead right. I mean, I'm assuming you don't have much building or construction knowledge, so what's really the point of going to do those inspections? Generally, before the bank makes one of those progress payments that Margaret was talking about earlier, they're going to send somebody out to inspect it, somebody who knows that, yes, this work that was supposed to be done has been done, so we make the payment. Look, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Margaret owns investment property outside of her own state. I don't. Margaret did a property development outside of her own state. I probably wouldn't. Is one of us right? Is one of us wrong? We're just different. And one of it probably has to do with our risk profile. So assess your own risk profile, and then that might help you to work out whether you are willing to do it. Number one, willing to do a development, and number one, willing to do a development remotely. If you are going to do a development remotely, you need to have people that you can trust on the ground in that particular location.
Yeah, you definitely need the team. Both of my developments, even though one was in my own state, it was still a 2.5-hour drive, so I couldn't sort of pop there anytime I felt like it. I could have, I guess, but I can't travel that at that short notice, and I can't leave home all the time like that. The Adelaide one, I didn't look at it at all until it was finished, and even then I only looked at it because I think I was down there with you, Pete, celebrating finally our win with the council, and I came down for dinner so that we could thank the team, and I rushed out and had a quick look at it then, but by then it was all done except for carpets. The New South Wales one, the one thing that was good, I guess, is we did an inspection after the roof went on, just because, again, we were in the area, and there was a few things I was able to go, oh, change this, change that, change the other. But you have to remember, and you'll get this when you read the book, that development was a little bit of a different argument because there was an important emotional buy-in on that one for reasons that you'll read in the book. Whereas the South Australian one, no emotional buy-in at all. It was being built to rent out to a tenant, and I trusted the team and my builder to build a product that was going to be right for that tenant. I didn't need to inspect it, and I think the danger, had I expected it, was I might have then started to want to include things that weren't required and overspent and did all that sort of stuff. So I think you can develop from afar as long as you've got that team under you or next to you, beside you. Shana has a question, and she says, I struggle to get the right person department with councils in regards to their zoning and regulation redevelopment. The front counter receptionist or call taker says send an email due to COVID, or there's a link to our website. I have specific questions and cannot access the right person or department. Emails get no response or are generic statements. Do you have any suggestions or tips? I have a sound understanding of planning schemes, but every council, local government are different. Good on you, Shana. I don't have a sound understanding of planning schemes, and I built lots of developments now, really, and I've still got no idea how they think. But it can be hard with councils at the moment, Peter.
It is, and a lot of councils would prefer inquiries online. They don't want that physical contact whilst we've still got COVID hanging around. So it can be quite difficult. One of the advantages of working with the one council for a while is you get to know people by name. So rather than sending it at info at something shire, it's the person's name at that particular shire, and so they get it directly. Look, the other thing that I would consider, if you're finding it hard to get the right information about development in that particular council, maybe you need to look in another council area. Because if you're having difficulty now, imagine what it's going to be like when things do get difficult for you down the track. Look, it's not easy. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it. But I think, like many other things in business, that personal relationship is important. Very hard to do if you're doing it remotely, as many of us are doing it now. But if you can develop a personal relationship, like, for example, I will always go to the council and speak to a planner, even though I may have spoken to somebody on the phone, and then I've emailed and somebody else has responded to me. I want that face-to-face conversation about my particular development, and you develop a rapport that way. It doesn't come, it won't come straight away, but with experience, it will come.
Yeah, look, Shana, with my New South Wales development, the first thing I did before I even, drew a line on a piece of paper was I retained my independent private town planner, and I made sure I got one who previously worked at the council that I was dealing with. And initially, he did some work for me as part of the pre-consultation process before I paid any money. So he was able to answer a lot of the questions that I had before I made that decision to go ahead with him. And he gave me a fixed price quote and an outline of what he would do for that quote. And it was worthwhile, I felt, because he has a direct line into that council. He knows the planners because he used to work with them. He knows the rules because he used to implement them for the council. And it saved me a lot of time. And again, given that I was 2.5 hours from there and wouldn't have been able to go into the council anyway, I was dealing with a regional council, and regional councils can be lovely, fabulous people, but often they don't have as well developed processes in place. So I found that town planner was worth his weight in gold for all the reasons you're outlining in your email. I suggest start with a town planner who has worked at the council before but who is now in private practice, and you might find that you can get better cut through into council. Well, that is it for another week. Make sure that you send the show link to anyone that you know who may be interested in developing their own property so that they can also become a little bit more educated. If we answered your question tonight, you are the lucky recipient of Diary of a Small Developer. But to get it, you need to send an email to pam@mypropertytv.com.au with the subject Book Prize. Tell me your name, address and which question you asked, and your book will be on its way to you. And there it is. It looks great. Thank you to the property professor, Peter, for coming along tonight again and being so patient, Peter.
Thank you, Margaret. Always a pleasure to be on your show, and congratulations on not only completing the book, but also finishing those 2 wonderful developments.
And congratulations to you too. You'll have to visit us and come and see in real life the development that you have helped with. If you want to contact Peter, just let me know and I can get any of your questions directly through to Peter. He'll be back again later in the year. And next time around, I think we'll have a good long chat about Adelaide. There's going to be plenty to talk about Adelaide with everything that's going on down there at the moment. You can get hold of a copy of that book, either physically or in digital form from Amazon, or you can go to my store at destiny.com.au, and we have some specials on those books at the moment, which include postage. Here are all my contact details if you have any questions, and if you'd like some guidance on where you should next be buying property. A fab new service, Property Match, is for you. Allow us to do all the work for you in hunting down that next hotspot. Just go to our website. Lots of information there. Go to mypropertymatch.com.au, which will tell you about Property Match, or just give us a call and have a chat over the phone. Have a great week, and I'll see you back here when next we air Property Investing Matters.
Property Investing Matters was brought to you by Destiny, empowering investors to achieve success through property investment for more than 24 years.